Hello, welcome to Church Searcher. My name is Chris and today we're going to be exploring the Battle of Byland, which was fought on the 14th of October 1322 between the armies of Robert the Bruce and the Scots and Edward II and the English. And it's here at Rievaulx Abbey where Edward II made his base before moving latterly to Byland Abbey, which we'll be visiting. Now, the Scots routed the English here through a daring flanking manoeuvre which took the Scots up a steep, narrow ravine through an area called Scotch Corner. And it's at Scotch Corner where there's yet another third chapel which we'll be seeing on our journey today. So, I'll get my boots on and I'll see you there after the map. Ever since Robert the Bruce's victory at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, the Scots had undertaken lots of successful raids into the north of England in an attempt to sue for peace. Meanwhile, Edward II had been distracted by lots of infighting amongst the barons, which he finally overcame at the Battle of Boroughbridge. So in 1322 he was finally free to focus on the problem with Scotland, and he in fact told the Pope that he intended to sue for peace through force of arms. So, it was in August of 1322 that King Edward II launched his invasion of Scotland, marching north with a large army estimated to be between 20 and 25,000 men. Robert the Bruce was ready for him, however, and completely evacuated the area all the way up to the Firth of Forth, making people leave towns, harvest their crops, remove animals, poison wells and burn the land, essentially leaving nothing to support the English army on their march north. By the time they reached Leith, the English were starving and sick, hungry, supply ships weren't getting to them, being harried by Scottish privateers and their allies, so in the end the English army were forced to return back. And so in retribution they burnt the abbeys at Holyrood, Melrose and Dryburgh. So King Edward II actually retreated all the way back to Rievaulx Abbey here, and this is where he made his headquarters while rebuilding his army. He levied troops from across all of the barons in the north and ordered every village in England to supply a fully armed soldier for his army, whilst also bringing in archers and crossbowmen from Wales. And it was here with his Queen Isabella that he waited for the new troops to arrive, ordering that the local barons, the Earl of Richmond and the Earl of Carlisle, provide new men between the ages of 16 and 60. Now when news reached Robert the Bruce that King Edward II had based himself here, he saw this as an opportunity, and with his troops they crossed the Solway in the west, made their way to Carlisle, and then moved down the Eden Valley through the Yorkshire Dales, Wensleydale in particular, and then eventually, covering 100 miles in 7 days, they got to Northallerton, which is about 15 miles from Rievaulx Abbey. So when news reached King Edward II that the Scots had arrived at Northallerton, realising that the Scots were probably intending to come here for him and his barons to try and capture them and sue for peace, he began to muster even more troops with more urgency, that they assemble at a place called Blackhull Moor, which today is interpreted to be the area around Old Byland, which is a little village between Rievaulx and Sutton Bank, not far from here. So with the battle imminent, King Edward II moved here to a more forward position at Byland Abbey. This is a Cistercian monastery that was founded in the 12th century around 1155. The intention of the Scots was clear. They were aiming straight for Rievaulx to try and get to King Edward. perhaps his queen also, and the northern barons. And if they captured them, they would then have these bargaining chips to be able to sue for peace and demand ransom. So it's with news of the arrival of the Scots that Edward II took up this more advanced position at Byland Abbey, and he ordered the Earl of Richmond, John of Brittany, to move with his men between 8,000 and 10,000 up onto Scourton Moor, effectively taking the high ground, a defensible position between Byland and Rievaulx, and blocking off the Scottish army. So up here on Sutton Bank you can just about see it, the Yorkshire Dales in the distance, and it's down Wensleydale that the Scots marched and arrived at Northallerton. You can just make out some white down there being picked out. And so the Scots marched overnight from Northallerton to arrive here at Sutton Bank, faced by Whitstone Cliff over there, and then Roulston Scar where we are here on the escarpment. Beyond that there's the winding A170 road which goes up Sutton Bank, quite a notorious steep windy road, but it actually follows the route of an old medieval trackway, and that's what the Scots would have been aiming for. But it was along this ridge all along the top that they would have arrived to find the English army all arrayed with their banners, shields, spears, ready to defend this high ground against the Scots. So the knights along the ridge here were led by Sir Thomas Uchtred of Scarborough, Constable of Pickering Castle, and Sir Ralph de Cobham, known as the bravest knight in all of England. However, the knights at their disposal were probably less experienced, having been raised in that second levy by Edward II, and it was those more inexperienced knights who faced the full wrath of the Scots as they charged up the valley here towards the steep medieval pass. It was the decision of Sir James Douglas, known as the Black Douglas, that the Scots attack head-on in order to not risk losing their prize in Edward II at Rievaulx. And the English defended, raining down rocks from above onto the Scots, who gradually made their way in hand-to-hand combat up this incredibly steep slope to face the English. So I'm just stood in front of the White Horse at Kilburn here, which was carved into the side of the Hambleton Hills back in the 1800s to commemorate the Hambleton racehorse, a thoroughbred from this area, as well as the race course which once stood on top of the plateau up there, which is now home to a gliding club. But it's up the valley to the left here, which is called Boar's Gill, where Robert the Bruce dispatched a unit of highlanders to try and outflank the English and surprise them on the top of Roulston Scar. Another unit dispatched around to the side here and went up an area known as Hell Hole, and we're going to be going up there now to try and find Scotch Corner, and it's there where there's a chapel that was constructed to piece by a local artist called John Bunting. This is it, this is the corner at Scotch Corner, and this is a chapel to peace that was built by John Bunting. So here at Scotch Corner you can really see the landscape down below that the Scots moved around Roulston Scar here, up Hell Hole, here to Scotch Corner. But it's here on Scotch Corner where local artist John Bunting built this chapel for peace as a war memorial. So John Bunting, a local artist and sculptor, built this chapel for peace as a war memorial in 1956, and it's made from the ruins of a derelict farmhouse. Now it's closed most of the year round, but they do open it for open days, and inside it's got beautiful carvings by John Bunting, including angels and a beautiful crucifix, and outside we can see a Madonna and Child carved by John Bunting, and also a dove holding an olive branch for peace, and some beautiful carvings in the door itself. And round the side we can just glimpse some of the stained glass. So, John Bunting was a local sculptor and artist who started out life down in Ramsgate on the south coast, but was evacuated from there as a schoolboy up to Ampleforth College, and that's a school and abbey not far from here. And it's while he was being taught here that he met another local artist, sculptor, artisan, Robert Mousey Thompson, and we've seen some of his work in the churches around here, woodwork in which he would carve his signature, a small mouse. And so it's Mousey Thompson that taught John Bunting how to carve. And it was upon finishing his education in 1945 that John Bunting enlisted with the Royal Marines, for which he served until he was demobbed in 1947. At that point he then returned to Kilburn, undertook a 12-month apprenticeship with Mousey Thompson, but it was a meeting with the sculptor Henry Moore who advised him to undertake an education in art and perhaps aim to teach in order to bring in an income, that led him to go and join St Martin's College and then from there go to the Royal Academy of Art. Upon completing his studies there, he then travelled before returning to Ampleforth in 1955 as the Master of Drawing. He then taught there for the rest of his career before retiring into a studio nearby in Nunnington and teaching all around the area as well. Now the chapel here is dedicated to peace in memory of all those who lost their lives in the Second World War. In particular, it's also dedicated to 3 fellow Amplefordians. They are the poet Michael Fenwick, who died in 1941, and Hugh Dorner and Michael Almond, who both died in 1944. So on the step to the doorway, it's actually carved in here, John Joseph Bunting, sculptor and artist of Rievaulx, built this chapel 1957 and died 19th of November 2002, aged 75. And on the door here, it's beautifully carved. Unfortunately, it's got this wrought iron fence in front of it, but you can make out some biblical allegorical motifs all around it. Maybe make out Cain and Abel fighting at the top, possibly the Annunciation, and we have a tree with a serpent wrapped around it, Adam and Eve reaching for the forbidden fruit. Possibly got Moses there striking the rock with water gushing out, perhaps parting the Red Sea. We have a depiction of the crucifixion, possibly bringing in the harvest there, sheaves of wheat, the loaves and fishes at the bottom, possibly the baptism of John the Baptist there at the top, the Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus, possibly Isaac and Abraham and the ram, maybe the resurrection here, and then the vine at the bottom, the grapes. So it's up here that the Highlanders came to launch their surprise attack on the English, who were up on the ridge where the gliding club is here. So they completely outflanked them, took them by surprise, coming around the rear. This area now known as Scotch Corner. So the Scots emerged from Scotch Corner and up Boar's Gill onto this flat plateau here on top of Roulston Scar, taking the English completely by surprise. This is a flat plateau on top of Roulston Scar where the gliding club now stands. The Scots emerged, forming up on the English left flank and overwhelming the lightly defended slopes that they'd left up here. So with the English facing the Scots on both sides now, it was Cobham who decided to withdraw with his troops, while Uchtred fought on until being captured. The English then retreated back down towards Cold Kirby and Old Byland, while the Scots assembled together, joining both flanks, pushing on. And so with news of this disastrous rout reaching Edward II here at Byland Abbey, he decided to abandon his post here and move back to the relative safety of Rievaulx. Now when news of this reached Robert the Bruce, he dispatched his own son-in-law, Walter the Steward, with 500 light, fast horsemen to try and capture Edward II. The race effectively was on. But it's here that Edward II actually finally outwitted Robert the Bruce, and instead of heading directly south towards the safety of the city of York, he went east towards Pickering, sending word from there for a ship in Bridlington. However, with no ships to be found, he ended up returning to York, taking a more circuitous route. So when Walter the Steward arrived at the walls of York and found them heavily defended, he'd effectively missed Edward II because he was in a completely different place. And so Walter the Steward came back north, raiding and pillaging as he went, along with the rest of the Scottish army. So it's out of his new base at Rievaulx that Robert the Bruce set about raising ransoms for his captives, including an incredible £20,000 for the Earl of Richmond. And so with his armies raiding and harassing the whole of the north of England, peace negotiations were entered into early in 1323. And it was in the summer of that year that the King's Council in York finally proposed a 12-year truce, which Robert the Bruce accepted, along with the title of the King of the Scots, with Edward II finally effectively relinquishing his de facto title, bringing an end to this particular set of hostilities between the English and the Scots. So it's up here on Sutton Bank, not far from the North York Moors National Park Visitor Centre, that there's a monument that's been erected to the fallen at the Battle of Byland. And this was put in place on the 700th anniversary of the battle in 2022. And it stands alongside an information board overlooking the escarpment where the battle took place. And it's right by the side of the road where the Scots tried to force their way up. So if you want to visit the area, the National Park Centre is a good place to start because it gives you access to the trails and footpaths all the way along the cliffs here to the White Horse and the glider station. There's also a footpath to John Bunting's chapel, and you're not far here from Rievaulx, an English heritage property, and also Byland Abbey, which is a free English heritage property. Now I'm going to be returning to Byland Abbey in a future video soon, so do look out for that. But until then, keep church searching.